Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here along with my colleagues from the NIH, actually at the ACMP, and Anissa, thanks very much for giving us this opportunity. I'm going to take a slightly different approach on the presentation of what the priorities of NIDA are, because at this point, we're basically in a stage where the problems that are related to drug addiction actually are the #1 public health problem that we are encountering. So that certainly, I want you all to be aware of this and how we're moving towards, because it gives us an incredible opportunity for research projects and for you to be actively involved with it. But before I do that, I want to actually make you aware of some very significant changes that have happened at the Institute. We were finally able to recruit Dr. Rita Valentino, who's now the head of the basic neuroscience, very well known for all of you, and she has been with NIDA. I guess she's going to be coming close to 1 year. And also, we have been brought back Redona Chandler, who's going to be in charge of our HIV program at NIDA, which actually accounts for 30% of our budget. We are in the process of actively searching for a director of the Division of Therapeutics. Dr. Phil Skolnick, who used to be the director, actually left NIDA to go and is now working at Opiant. Now, before I engage on specific subject matters, I want you to be aware of where we are in the nature of how things are changing in the paradigm of addiction in our country. NIDA has placed always a priority to investigating the effects of drugs in children and adolescents because they are the most vulnerable, and therefore prevention strategies that aim at them are the ones that are most likely to be beneficial in that they can prevent the development of addiction as well as all of the untoward consequences linked with drug use. Interestingly, we have seen, and this is data from 2016, but the data from 2017, which was just released, basically shows the same, which is that we are observing the lowest rates of abuse of substances among teenagers that we have seen in many, many years since the inception of the Monitoring the Future survey. In the lower panels, you have the last month use for the legal substances, both tobacco and alcohol, and you can see that actually the levels have been decreasing significantly, much more abruptly for cigarette smoking, nicotine smoking, than for alcohol. But nonetheless, you can also see it for alcohol. In the upper right quadrant, you also are seeing in this case the 1-year estimates of drug use, how they have also been significantly declining for the abuse of prescription opioids, which obviously is not the case in the adult population. But we've seen significant advances in that respect. And there's been significant decreases across most of the illicit substances of abuse. And the only substance, interestingly, that we have not seen decreases in consumption is that of marijuana. So cannabis use, whether you look at it in terms of last year use versus monthly use or regular daily use, has been actually stable. So it's stable against the landscape of decreases in all of the other drugs in this age population. And it's also stable in contrast to what we are observing across the country, where the use of marijuana is significantly increasing, particularly among those that are in 18 to 28 years of age. Similarly, whereas in the whole United States, we're seeing an increase in the abuse of heroin, we're actually observing that the levels of heroin use among teenagers are among the lowest we've ever recorded. So the question that has risen is what is accounting for these very low rates of use of drugs among teenagers? And I think that this is an extremely important scientific question that deserves actually evaluating, because understanding it, of course, gives us an opportunity to then use it and tailor it as a potential for prevention interventions. And again, one can speculate at what may be driving these decreases on use on teenagers, but at this time it's purely speculative. But from the research perspective, we're very interested on actually trying to answer what is it in the landscape of the life of teenagers in our country that has changed that is leading to these behaviors. The other aspect that is very, very relevant to us and is relevant to many other institutes, certainly the Alcohol Institute, who has actually been a co-partner in this project, also the National Institutes of Mental Health, the National Institutes of Neurological Diseases, is how does the teenager brain develop in the transition from childhood into adulthood, and how do drugs, including alcohol, ultimately affect that development. And so we've launched, as you know, 1 year and 2 months ago, the ABCD study for adolescent brain development and cognition that aims to follow 10,000 children prospectively, periodically performing structural, functional brain imaging, as well as doing deep phenotyping, genotyping, and analysis of behaviors and social networks. The study, as I say, was launched a little bit over a year, and I'm very proud to actually say that as of December, these slides were not updated, but I updated them to December the 3rd. We've actually been able to recruit close to 6,462 children that many of them are actually now coming for their second evaluation. So this has been an incredible success in terms of the launching, thanks to the commitment from the staffs of the various institutes. There was the first release of the data, that it has not been curated, and the curated data release is going to be either in December or January. And the data will be released on a yearly basis. From there, I want to jump into the main topic that actually has generated so much interest and is changing the priorities because of the urgency of the matter, which is the opioid crisis that our country is actually embedded in. And just to get you an idea of the magnitude of the consequences for this crisis is these geographic maps that actually identify the number of deaths per 100,000 individuals in the different areas of the country in 1991 versus 2015. And the color, the temperature, the red and yellow color show the areas with the highest levels of overdoses per 100,000. And you can see how rapidly, basically, the numbers have risen in most of the United States. And in some areas in the United States, for example, and actually if I were to have the map of the 2016, I can predict that we're going to be seeing a significant increases in the red over the northern, eastern parts of the United States, where the mortality in some of the areas is estimated to reach sometimes 40 overdoses per 100,000 individuals. And this led on September 2nd to this editorial on the New York Times that actually presented the preliminary analysis from the CDC data that reflects the states that were reporting what they were expecting to observe in terms of the fatalities for 2016. Based on those estimates, it's actually, they calculated that in 2016, there were 64,000 overdose deaths in the United States, the highest that we've ever seen, way surpassing the peak on the fatalities associated with car accidents, as well as the peak of the fatalities at the peak of the HIV epidemic. And this is actually what has alerted us as a nation that this, despite all of the efforts that different agencies have been trying to do, we have not been able to contain the fatalities linked with this crisis. The editorial goes on to make the analysis that the CDC has started to do to try to actually disentangle what are these overdose fatalities associated with. And you can see to the right that the fatalities are classically associated with opioid prescription, hydrocodone, Vicodin, actually are sort of stabilizing. But on the other hand, we are seeing very, very rapid increases in fatalities associated with heroin. And look at the fatalities associated with fentanyl. In 2016, it was estimated that there were 20,000 fatalities in the United States linked with fentanyl, highlighting the nature and the shifting nature of this opioid crisis. Started with the opioid medications prescribed for pain, then transitioning into heroin because it's actually less expensive and easier to achieve. And now, in terms of a market that sees the potency of synthetic opioids as something that can be utilized in order to increase the market value of opioids in the black market, whether it is by lacing heroin or by selling the fentanyl by itself. And this is driving the fatalities because, as you realize, fentanyl is 50 times more potent than heroin. And there's been also instances of lacing of heroin with drugs like carfentanil, which actually are more than a magnitude higher than any of the other drugs that are currently abused. So in the line of this shifting landscape and what are the challenges and what is it that we are identifying as priorities for science on the opioid crisis, well, at NIDA, we've been very clearly aware that there are three components to it. One of them relates to pain. That's where the opioid crisis started. There is a need for better treatments for the management of pain, and the lack of those treatments has led to the overprescription of opioid medications, which, while very effective for the management of acute pain, are much more harder to use in terms of chronic pain. And they also are not the panacea because you rapidly develop tolerance, you can become addicted, and the doses that are necessary to achieve analgesia with chronic use are actually high risk for overdoses. So it's clear that we need to develop alternative treatments. So that's a space that we've been investing very much, predominantly in two areas of research, one of them opioids that are non-addictive, the other one in terms of the value of other neurotransmitters like cannabinoids. And then in the base of that triangle, we have the opioid use disorders. On the one hand, the treatment of addiction, opioid addiction, and in the other, what are the interventions that we can do to either prevent overdoses or to reverse them? And this identifies how exciting the whole area is as it relates to the development of new pain medications that may not be as addicted. And I'm highlighting this for the opioid system because this is one of the ones where we funded most of the research and where at the beginning it seemed like it was going to be impossible to actually be able to develop an opioid medication that would have decreased side effects and perhaps even decreased rewarding actions. And with a better understanding about the intracellular signaling mechanism of the opioid receptor and how the three-dimensional structure gets differentially engaged by different type of opioid agonists, now has led chemists into designing opioid agonists that specifically bind in such a way that they activate the G protein signaling mechanism that is responsible for analgesia, while not engaging the beta-arrestin, which is responsible for many of the side effects, including respiratory depression. In the area of treatment of opioid use disorder, we have three medications, methadone, buprenorphine, and naltrexone, and there's an extended release naltrexone that makes actually improving compliance. And those three medications have been shown to be effective in a wide variety of settings. There's no doubt that they're actually very valuable, and there's no doubt that they prevent overdoses. But they are underutilized. And into the right, you actually see the cascade on care. Just focus on the blue lines that actually show you where we are as opposed to where we were. And if you look at it in terms of how many patients are sustaining these medications over long periods of time, which is what you require in order to prevent overdoses and to promote recovery, we have less than 2% of them achieving it. Multiple factors are responsible for them, including the fact that there are not sufficient treatment programs, that there is stigma against these medications, and also we have to also describe it that while they are very effective, they do not all of the patients respond to them, and even when provided in some of the best setups, 50% of individuals will relapse in 6 months, highlighting the importance of developing alternatives that on the one hand will improve compliance, but that would also provide those alternative treatments. So we are very interested actually on developing this space. The easier, the low-hanging fruit are developing extended release formulations of medications like buprenorphine or naltrexone that can going to make it easier for patients to be treated. And so that's a space where we've engaged with pharmaceutical companies to actually help them develop these treatments, but also work with researchers in order to implement them into the healthcare system. We've also very interested on implementation research to engage the healthcare system in the participation for the treatment of individuals with an opioid use disorder, as well as in the criminal justice system. In line of this and the urgency to which actually we are actually facing as a nation, the difficulty that we are getting in actually developing new pain medications despite the scientific opportunities that have been brought by the development of new targets, by the knowledge of new targets. This is an area that is basically very, very limited in terms of development. So, and the same thing with the development of medications for opioid use disorder. NIDA basically de-risked the compounds and worked with the companies to make them actually much more willing to invest in this space. So NIH as a whole, now, not just NIDA, is engaging on a public-private partnership to address the opioid crisis in which we've actually partnered. There are 30 pharmaceutical companies had expressed industry interest in actually engaging in this public-private partnership that aims to develop in the pain area, in that pre-competitive space, projects that will facilitate the development of analgesics. And we have identified at the top, one of them is to get this pharmaceutical industry to share data on successful and failed drug development as to share compounds for repurposing. The second one is to generate a coordinated clinical testing, clinical trial for testing of novel treatments and for development of biomarkers. And the third one is the development of validated biomarkers that can allow you to actually predict treatment responses. In the opioid use disorder space, we've actually identified three projects also. The number one is the development of medications for opioid use disorders, highlighting the opportunity that we have for developing new and longer-lasting extended formulations of currently available medications like naltrexone. It would be wonderful to have an naltrexone that lasts 3 months or 6 months. Combinations of currently available medications that can improve outcomes, as well as development of medications that actually have been repurposed that do not target the mu-opioid receptor. The second one is the development of treatment interventions to actually reverse overdoses, which have become increasingly more difficult with the arrival of synthetic opioids like fentanyl. In many cases, they do not necessarily respond to naloxone or require multiple doses. And finally, a very important project, actually it's not listed there, but it wasn't updated, is the development of alternative outcomes other than abstinence that can facilitate development of medication and approval by the FDA. So these are the projects that we are right now preparing for the public-private partnership with the timeline of having a plan to be launched by the beginning of next year. Thanks very much.